All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm so excited about today's guest. Marion Van Horn is a neuroscientist studying developmental neuroplasticity. She obtained her PhD in neurophysiology from McGill University and is currently a postdoc researcher at the Montreal Neurological Institute, where she studies molecular and cellular mechanisms underlying developmental neuroplasticity. Whew! Mouthful. She studies how external factors can influence how neurons explore and is trying to better understand the nitty-gritty signaling pathways underlying how neurons make strong synaptic connections with other neurons to make functional neural circuits. Marion is also a mom of 3 and is fascinated about how early life experiences can influence the development of her kids. Marion leans on the research that tells us that early life experiences are important for shaping the brain and uses this as an excuse to slow down and appreciate the time she has with her children. While parenting is not easy, she reminds us that the books we read, our children, the conversations we have, the banana bread we make, the camping trips we go on are all experiences that will help build a better brain in the long run. Marion lives in Montreal, Canada, and she and her husband share candid everyday moments on their YouTube channel, Viva Family, and on Instagram at Marion_Van Horn. So without further ado, let's get to the show. You guys, I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Marion Van Horn to the show. She's a research associate, and today we're going to talk about brain development, including developmental plasticity, and we're going to learn about synaptic pruning. Really exciting stuff. Dr. Marion is a research associate. Technically, in the States, it'd be called her postdoc. She is deep in the research, and I'm really just so excited to learn from her. She's a mom of 3, and you know, as moms with all our kids at home, I think she has some amazing techniques on how we can just be supportive of our kids and their brain development. And then also we'll dive into a little bit of COVID stuff and how we can protect ourselves and what it means to have this pandemic happening, and for me personally, during pregnancy. So, Dr. Marion, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting.
Yeah.
Researchers don't, step away from their lab bench that often. So this is new to me and exciting. And so I'm really happy to be here and chat. I've watched your podcast, and I think you interview some really great people. So it's fun.
Well, I get really excited to interview people that are doing the work. So researchers are my favorite. Doctors are my favorite. I love to just learn what you're learning because it's cutting edge. It's the stuff that's coming out of the lab right now, and the things that we're learning that I just love for it to be timely. So often there are like, scientific books or, the books that you get in classes if you're going back to school, and they were published 5 years ago on research that was published 20 years ago. And I like the new age stuff.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the point. Is the biggest problem with the stuff that we're doing in the labs is it takes years sometimes. I think I read that it takes up to 20 years before things are actually out and public knowledge, and things are happening really quickly. And as scientists, we're really focused sometimes on just our own individual work and what we're doing and publishing papers. It's really competitive. And so sometimes we forget to like step back and look at the big picture and try and tell people about it. And because sometimes it's complicated and it's not always easy to relate it to like your neighbor on the street or even your mom or your grandmother. But I think ultimately that should be our goal. So I was inspired by Dr. Andrew Huberman, who you had on your podcast, and he's doing some really great work, and he's sharing his knowledge. And I was like, if he can do it, he's a Stanford professor, he's super busy. I'm going to try. And so I'm happy to chat with you.
Oh, good. I'm so excited. Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially people like you and Dr. Huberman, if you're able to just give us an analogy or break it down or give us an applicable tool that we can use with our kids or something that you've learned from your research, I mean, that's where the golden nuggets are and that's where the takeaways are. So I'm so excited to have you. But before we get started into the exact research that you're doing and what you're learning, I'd love to understand why you went back to school, what inspired you to become a researcher, and what exactly you're researching in your lab.
So I'll start, I guess, at the beginning. I've always been interested in health in general. If I go back to, I've been in school for a really long time. I think I basically have always been in school.
Yeah.
And if I go back to like after, even in high school, I always chose sciences, and I was interested in biology and physiology, and I took physiology courses after high school. We have kind of a pre-university degree, so I did a health science degree and then a physiology degree, and so I was learning about the body. And I've also just always at the same time been very interested in my own personal health, and I'm always I'm really into athletics and on sports teams, so interested in how my nutrition affects performance and just in general eating well. And I find all those things very interesting. So I think naturally I've been just following that course. So I did an undergrad at McGill in physiology. And then from then I became interested in research. I connected with a neurophysiologist who was in the department, and she was really a fabulous researcher, Dr. Kathy Cullen. And so she was doing some interesting research. And so I started as a summer research technician, and then that turned into a master's, and it turned into a PhD. And during that time, I was actually studying eye movements. So I was looking at how the brain controls eye movements, and really interesting to figure out, like, there are these cells in your brainstem which project directly to your eyes, and they move your eyes around. And so you don't always think about it, but your eyes are constantly moving. Even if you're focused on something, your eyes are making these tiny little microsaccades. And saccades are these big eye movements. If you're looking around the room, you're making all these different eye movements. If you see a train go by, you're making smooth pursuit types of eye movements. And surprisingly, we still don't know exactly how the brain makes these types of eye movements. So we do these recordings, we record the neural activity. So the brain communicates by changes in neural activity. And these cells are really, like, they're amazing. They have huge changes in activity. So as you move your eyes from right to left, you hear this huge buzzing of activity. Like, all the cells come on and like zoom, zoom, and your eyes move at like this crazy velocity. So they're like the fastest moving things, like 600 degrees per second. It's like super fast.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah. So it's like things you wouldn't even think about. And for my PhD project, finally, I ended up looking at the neural control of vergence eye movements. So vergence, you make converging eye movements when you move from far to near, and vice versa. If you're looking something close to something that's far, your eyes are moving at all kinds of different angles. And so we were trying to figure out how the brain does that. And it turns out it's not that complicated, but it is something that we needed to kind of figure out. But after that, after I finished my PhD, and I think if anyone has done a PhD, they will understand, you kind of become saturated with that field. And I really wanted to go and do something else. I was studying the brain. I was really interested in the brain, but I really felt like I became really specific on eye movements and different. I heard a lecture from my current advisor, Ed Ruthazer, and he gave this really amazing lecture. I think I was pregnant at the time. I was pregnant at the end of my PhD, and I was just fascinated to hear about all this plasticity that was happening in the brain. And he was doing this cutting edge research, doing 2-photon imaging, where you're able to like go in and look at the cells. And he had this technique of, and others too, but of doing calcium imaging. So I did all this work studying the electrical activity of neurons, but neurons also communicate in other ways. They have changes in calcium within the cell. And so I was like, oh, I want to go learn that. And so it's kind of non-traditional to really change. I mean, I was still studying neuroscience, but it was a pretty big change. And so I went and did a postdoc in his lab. At that point, I had one kid. I spent the 1 year at home with her writing my thesis, and also my husband took some time off. So we were home with her for about a year, maybe 8 months. And then I went and started this postdoc, and it was a huge learning experience. There's so much going on in the brain. It's just every time, I feel like every day I learn something new. And every day I'm like, wow, we didn't know that, or this is amazing. And there's so many directions we can go in. So I'm just fascinated about all these different things.
Wow. I mean, for people who have never heard of plasticity, can you explain what plasticity is?
Yeah. So plasticity is just a really simple way of saying that the brain is changing. So if you think of something that is plastic, if you melt plastic a little bit or warm it up, it becomes very malleable. And that's very similar to the brain. If you warm it up, if you use it, things are able to change. So our brain is always changing. And that's the concept of neuroplasticity. And if we think of developmental neuroplasticity, when we're babies and during early childhood, our brain is considered very plastic. There's a lot of change going on, especially during the first 2 years, and then the first 10 years, and the first 25 years. The brain is constantly reorganizing. And then even in adulthood, there's lots of opportunities for neuroplasticity. And I think that's the most fascinating thing, is that our brain is always open to change, and that if we're persistent and we put some effort, we can, if there's something that we don't like, we can change. There's opportunities to change.
Definitely. I think you hear a lot as a parent about how important those first 5 years are with children's brain development, and how it can set them up for a lifetime of success and ability to learn and all of that. It's good to know that even, in my late 30s, I have the ability to change and grow. But I would love to know what you're learning about brain plasticity and development, and what you know when it comes to child development, what we can do to nurture that. If there are any techniques or things that you're seeing parents do that may be actually detrimental too.
Right. So yeah, that's really interesting, because I would say in the lab, we're doing a lot of studies to look at how neurons are changing, and how our experiences and how our environment can affect how neurons grow and how they interact with each other. And so we're interested in looking at how these neural circuits form. And I should say, I don't work in humans, so all of our work is in an animal model. We work on tadpoles. And so that's, I think, interesting in and of itself, because usually when I tell people that I work in a lab, I'm a neuroscientist and I work with tadpoles, I think they envision me in a pond, like picking up tadpoles and looking at their swimming. And we're really studying them because we want to learn more about the human brain. And so there are a lot of things that we can learn from a tadpole brain, really fundamental mechanisms that can tell us a lot about neuroplasticity. And so some of the things that we've been talking about, just that the fact that we can go in and image these or take pictures of these neurons, so we can express different proteins that if you shine a laser at different frequencies, at different wavelengths, you can see them glow under the microscope, which is like really fascinating. And we should share more pictures of them because they're really beautiful. And you can track these in a tadpole, so we can look at when they start as a little egg, and within a week or two, they're swimming, seeing, and they're not fully developed, but they're a developed system. So in this very short period, we can manipulate their environment and their experiences and try and see how that affects how neurons grow and how they interact with each other and how their neural circuits are forming. So those are the types of very general experiments. And then we have to really narrow them down into really specific experiments to see. And we're testing things like, how does activity, so how does if you stimulate a certain part of the brain with visual activity, for example, we study an area of the brain called the optic tectum in the tadpole, which is very similar or comparable to the visual system or the visual cortex in humans. And in that system, it connects directly to the eye. So the eye has information from the outside world. It activates the neurons in the eye, which then send projections to this part of the brain, which then activates that part of the brain. So we want to look at how changes in visual activity affects the activity in the brain. And so there are all kinds of different types of experiments we can do there. But what's been interesting for me is to try and take some of those takeaways and then bring it back home, because I do have 3 kids. And as a scientist, you can sometimes get really involved in your work, and you're researching things, you're going to the lab, it's very, very busy. And then you're also trying to have a family on the side. And what I've had to really think about is like, what's really important for me as a mom, and how can I take what we're learning in the lab and bring it home? And so for this, I've started collaborating with someone outside of academia. Her name is Cindy Hovington, and she's started a website called Curious Neuron. And I started following her about a year ago, and it was just like, wow, this is really, she has a PhD in neuroscience, and she also did a postdoc in education, and she was really taking the research and translating it for me, even as a scientist. Like, wow, yeah, that's it. And so things that she focuses on a lot that I've really related to is the ability to teach our kids how to play. And play is just like the most amazing resource really for a child. They don't need toys. She's showed me that they don't need toys. They don't need much. She's taught me things about presenting, having an invitation to play. So just really cleaning up your whole play area and just leaving a toy here and there, and your child will go in and find one toy and just start playing. And so she'll go through the science behind it and explain how, if you give your child the opportunity to play, this develops confidence, this develops independence, and a whole all these different skills that you don't really think of. So now I have a totally different outlook on when my children are playing. It's really affected the way I've restructured our home so that we've gotten rid of a lot of toys. Everything's much simpler. I really like to give my kids a lot of opportunity to just kind of find their own way, because those are the other types of things that that are important, is that I think as parents, sometimes we want to really keep our kids safe. And in doing so, sometimes we take away opportunities that are actually really important for them. So another thing I just thought about is my middle daughter. She's 7, and she loves adventure. So she's out in the park, and she's drawn to the trees, and she just loves climbing trees. And so at first, I was like, I don't know, please come down. I'm nervous. And now I'm just like, okay, she's climbing trees. It's amazing. She's getting up there. She's never fallen. She's happy. And then when I look into the research, there's actually research showing how just climbing trees is really good for cognition, for memory, for working memory, for planning, for confidence, all these things that you wouldn't even think about, that you have to think at the level of a small child and think, how are they building different skills that maybe they're going to need when they're teenagers. And it's really starting from day one.
I love that so much. I love that so much, because I'm just even thinking about, which I'm sure everyone does when they hear research or they look into a finding, is how does that relate to my life? And I feel like so adventurous, and I love for Bash to climb. I mean, his nickname is Bash, which is sort of a problem in itself because we've been to the ER too many times to count. He's not even 2, but just to know that, like to have that in my back pocket, because we call Chris, my husband, the safety officer. And he's always like holding hands, crossing the street, no climbing, no like, and Bash is a little boy, and it's scary for us to watch him. I'm sure as it was for you to watch your middle daughter, like be fearless, but I think that's like, just even hearing you say that is a lesson that I want him to have. Like, I don't want him to be afraid of the world. I don't want him to be afraid to climb big trees.
Exactly.
So, I mean, the simplicity of your parenting advice, from like cleaning out toys and having an empty space where they can imagine, to climbing trees. I think all of us have this propensity to overschedule, buy lots of toys, try to get all the small motor, the large motor, the cognitive, like check all the boxes and go to all the classes so that our child isn't behind. But it seems like the research is proving that it isn't as important as we thought it was.
Right. Well, there's no research to show that going to a lot of classes is going to make your child smarter or have more social skills or anything like that. So really early in development, it's really important for just you and your child and your family unit to have connections. And so that's in the psychology research. I've read a lot of really interesting books. As a parent, I'm studying neuroscience, but I did a degree in psychology, or a minor, during my undergrad. And so I did learn about child psychology when I was 23 or something, but I don't remember any of it. It was so not part of my life at that point. So I've gone back and I've looked at some of the psychologists, and there's some really great resources out there of child psychologists who are breaking it down. And I recommend any parent to connect with people, and someone who that you connect with, and that you feel feel like there's something to it that you can take away from it. And so I've connected with now I'm blanking on her name, Lisa. I have her book somewhere, The No Drama Discipline, and she and Daniel Siegel have some really. Do you know them?
The Whole Brain Child, No Drama Discipline.
They have like 3 or 4 books, and they're easy reads. You can read them in not even an afternoon. And there's like immediate takeaways, learning about our child's psychology. And all of it made so much sense to me, understanding that the brain is constantly changing, and that our children really just need us there to support them, and that they're learning how to regulate their emotions, that tantrums are totally normal. This is also something that is on the Curious Neuron website, learning about tantrums. For me, I just, it's very frustrating to see your child having a tantrum, and it happens over the littlest things. You can't control your environment so that they don't have a tantrum. That doesn't work. And then to understand that it's totally normal. They're having a tantrum. You're there to support them, whatever they need. If they need time alone, or there's different things we can put in our toolbox. And then every time will be different, and we'll learn. And I think that's the most important thing, is that as parents, no one knows what's going on. Every child is different, and we're all learning. So my first child to my third child, they've all been so different, and I have to kind of navigate differently because they have different personalities, different traits. It's just, it's chaos at times, but it's good. It's embracing the chaos. That's what I'd like to say, because it's a lot. Being a parent is a lot. It's hard. It's time consuming. It's energy draining, and they're leaning on us. They really need us to be there. And I would say the other thing during this pandemic, which I've learned when we're home, and my kids were home from March until September full time, and my husband and I are both trying to kind of navigate and do some work. You learn a lot about your kids, and I think that's what's been so like the positives about this pandemic is been getting to know our kids, and it's been great in that sense. I mean, there are some rough moments. There's not a question, but it's been really great when I look back at the big picture. we've gotten to know each other.
I love that. I love that. I think we're all just kind of, I don't know, not saying winging it, but we're all just in there going, okay, like we're creating some sort of structure today, but we also want to have fun and we want to take care of our children. What are some things that you've been implementing since having them home, that you are kind of like, not, I wouldn't say deal breakers, but things that you're like, this has to happen every day, or this is really important to us because I know it's important to your brain development, or I know it's important to your plasticity in general, and that are just kind of always, they have to happen in your house, that maybe other people.
Yeah. So there's some key themes that I try to keep in our house, with keeping a lot of flexibility. So scheduling did not work for us. I remember the first day home, I saw all these posts on Instagram, how they were, 9 to 10, we're doing this. And that can work for some people. And we did have, maybe in the beginning, our school was pretty good. We had Zoom calls. So they did that. But otherwise, we really tried to let things flow. But we always went outside. That was on the checklist, going outside as often and as long as possible. I think that was the best thing for us. In the beginning, in March in Canada, it's quite cold. Weather can be not great. And so in the beginning, there's tears. People don't want to go out. It's more comfortable inside, but we went out like as much as possible. And I don't know if I've mentioned this or not, but we have a YouTube channel with our family. And so sometimes we were making YouTube videos, and sometimes we were going for walks. Sometimes we really tried to have fun. And that's something that I think that has, I've had to work on since having children. In the beginning, I felt like I was a little more straight and narrow, and there were rules, and people should be dressed, and people should be hairbrushed, and things. And those have really gone. Like if my daughter has like beautiful curly hair, if it gets washed and brushed once a week, that's a check mark. Like I'm happy. Sometimes it's better, but we lowered our expectations, and I actually found it was much easier for us.
Yeah, I feel like when we hold ourselves to such high expectations, it just creates more anxiety and stress, and we're putting it on ourselves. And a lot of times there are things that don't really matter, like hair.
Right, absolutely. And so getting back to going outside, there's actually a ton of research showing that we should be outside as a lot, and up to 1 to 3 hours is really what's suggested for children and even young babies. So there's research suggesting that getting outside, we can help set our circadian rhythms, and that can help us sleep better at night. It helps with exercise. So moving our body is really important. Independent play outside, finding things that aren't toys, sticks. My son, we have a collection of sticks by the front door because every time he goes out, he finds a new stick, and he hides them places. And we've been really lucky because we do have a park across the street from us. We live in pretty much downtown Montreal, but just on a little street, so that we are able to we have a park, and we have lots of green space directly in front of us, but we also try to take lots of little adventures. So we'll drive to a new park that's 20 minutes away, or my mom lives not far, but about an hour away, and she has a big property. So we'll go there. Or now that there's restrictions, we've become more creative, and we're finding little nooks and crannies within our city. And it's been fun to kind of have these adventures. And sometimes it's not easy to get them out. But usually, there are always great moments. So we try to build these memories.
This is such great advice, because I feel like so many parents with Zoom calls and the schedules that they have, and then like tutors stepping in or people trying to support, that these kids are in front of their screens the majority of the day and then never going outside. And if the research is saying 1 to 3 hours, that's like way more than I know the majority of kids are getting. Is there a time? Does the research suggest timing for playing outside, or is it just kind of like get it in?
Whenever is better than never. But there's a lot of good research showing that if you get out early in the morning, this helps set your circadian rhythm. So just the changes in light can tell your brain that it's morning time, and then changes the type of light that's in the evening will tell your brain it's nighttime. So all these things are happening that we don't even think about. So yeah, ideally it would be great to get out in the morning and sometime at night and maybe in the middle of the day. And so your brain is all like, oh yeah, keeping track of what time it is, and maybe they'll sleep better at night. I know there is some research, I don't know the research that well, but even in infants, that it can help set their circadian rhythm. And that kind of brings me to the next topic of sleep, which is I'm kind of pretty strict on sleep. I mean, we can be a little flexible, but I really try and make sure that they're sleeping well and that they get enough sleep. And I think during the pandemic, when we were home, that was actually pretty good, because they were able to go to bed and wake up naturally. So we didn't have alarms set. And I think that's really important, because the research is showing that we have these different phases of sleep, and it changes throughout development. And we don't know exactly what's happening when the brain is sleeping, but we know that there's a ton of neuroplasticity. So the brain is reorganizing during sleep. And I read this really fantastic book by Matt Walker, Why We Sleep, which is just a fascinating read. I would recommend that to anyone who's interested in sleep. And I think I related to a number of different things he brought up in the book. Some being, as a parent, we want to be getting enough sleep, because especially if you're home with your children, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're trying to work until 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning and then getting up, you're cranky. It's just like, it's impossible to be patient with your children who need you to be patient if you're not getting enough sleep. And I've noticed that if I can't fall asleep, and then I mean, my problem is I go to bed and then I can't fall asleep, and then I start worrying that I'm not getting enough sleep.
No.
So that's, don't get into that problem, but try to get the 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And I mean, it's great if you can just get into a regular routine. And so sleeping going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. Not always possible, but at the big picture, if you can try and fit that in, it's good.
I think having kids really supports you to be on a schedule too. Whereas I used to go to bed when I was like, oh, we watched a show, or like I'm reading a book, and then I get wrapped up in it, and you can look up and be like, no. And then I'm just like you, because all that floods my brain is all of the problems that are going to happen the next day. I'm like decreased insulin sensitivity, increased like hunger, like all the things, inability to concentrate and learn. I'm like, oh my gosh, stress myself out. Yeah. All right. So we're going outside for 1 to 3 hours a day with our children, preferably sometime in the morning and sometime at night, just so that their little circadian clocks can link up with, okay, it's morning, okay, it's night, to support sleep. Really focusing on sleep as a priority, 7 to 9 hours, trying not to use alarms if we can avoid it, especially if people are still home with the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's this idea that we need to set our alarm and get up early and be really productive. Something I read in this book, and I looked into the research, and it's fascinating, is that we do go through these cycles of sleep, and you're going from deep sleep to REM sleep, so rapid eye movement sleep, and these different phases, the brain is going through totally different different types of changes. So some is really important for memory consolidation, and we're really just figuring out, like, what are the neurons doing? How are they reorganizing? There's a lot of I don't think we've talked about this, but synaptic pruning, so that there are these specialized cells in the brain called microglia, which are the immune cells of the brain. And they come in and they start nibbling on our synapses. The synapses are the point of communication between two neurons. And so they're changing, and especially in children, they're changing a lot during the first couple of years. So these microglia have been shown within the last 2 or 3 years to be inhibited by norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is this neuromodulator that's increased during the day and decreased during night. So they think that these microglia cells are kind of turning on at night and coming in and doing all the cleanup. And so I think that's just fascinating to think that there are these microglia, and these are things that we're studying in the brain. In the lab, we can follow the microglia for hours on end and see what they're doing and how they change shape and how they get close to synapses. And there's this new term called tragocytosis, where they come in and they think they nibble on the synapses. So I think that's really cool. And we don't know, like, we just are figuring it out now. So
it's crazy.
Get your sleep.
It's crazy for me to think about sleep, because we know how restorative sleep is. We know how good we feel when we sleep. I mean, if you've ever had a great night's sleep, you just know your mood is different. Your hunger cues are different. Like you were saying, your ability to have patience with your children, to manage stress in your job. But then we learn about the lymphatic system. We learn that there's amyloid plaque that's being cleansed every evening when that sleep is happening. And now to learn that there are these synaptic pruning mechanisms to, like, it. I mean, that just blows my mind. It's taking it a step further. So you said that they're only doing this type of synaptic pruning in the presence of norepinephrine, or in the absence of norepinephrine?
It looks like in the absence. So these are papers that have come out just in the last year or two, showing that if you add norepinephrine, they are less motile. So they're not as dynamic. They're not moving as much. So the hypothesis is that during sleep, when norepinephrine is lower, that these cells would start to activate and do that type of pruning.
Do our activities and the things that we do throughout the day stimulate norepinephrine? Is there something that we may be doing before bed that creates norepinephrine that is not great for this type of pruning?
I don't think so. So norepinephrine is really, it's a neuromodulator. It comes on during alertness and during high levels of activity, like in terms of brain activity. And so it's higher in general when we're awake. And then when we're asleep, the levels drop. And it could be more complicated than that. We could have little spikes of norepinephrine through the night. And it could be that there are specific phases of the sleep. So during the deep sleep, they might be more important as compared to the REM sleep. But these are studies that they're going to just start to, I would say they're just starting to write the grants to get the money to do the experiments in a couple years, which are going to be done probably in mice, which are then going to be published. And so we're talking like 10 to 15 years before we even really have an answer to these questions. But I think the takeaway is get enough sleep, because there's a lot of stuff going on and we're just starting to ask the right questions.
Right. I think about like adrenaline and norepinephrine and like the kind of like that, like hit training response to like working out really hard and being really amped up and really focused. And so maybe that's not the best stuff before bed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a good idea to start to ramp down before sleep and not a full workout right before you go to bed.
That's amazing. I mean, talk about like not only like the molding and the plasticity part, but now we're talking about a whole other function of like pruning, and seems like getting rid of the stuff that we don't necessarily need moving forward.
Right. And so that's why when we're babies, we're sleeping all the time. We're basically waking up to learn something and falling asleep. And so our brain is constantly going in and out of these states. And so it's really important for babies to have the opportunity to sleep. However, I think we're so fixated on sleep. We think that our babies should be sleeping like the whole night, or that that they should be trained and they should have really strict schedules. And I'm not sure that the research is there. For sure, babies don't develop their own circadian rhythms right away. So it's totally natural and normal that our children are not sleeping through the night. And if anyone's listening and knows a new mother, please do not ask them if their child is sleeping through the night. It's not the right question. Like, ask them if you should deliver them a lasagna tonight or tomorrow. That's it. Don't ask them if their child is sleeping through the night. I absolutely hate that question.
Yeah, well, it's true, because it's literally day by day, night by night,
and it changes. It will change for every child will be different, and one child will, there are things going on. We have to be responsive to them. And I think that's should be our priority as parents. And I think when we're constantly hearing, or are they sleeping through the night? How are they sleeping? Are they a good sleeper? It's like, oh, should they be like what? And that's not what we know. We know that they should be sleeping in intervals and also be awake and going back between the two states. But this idea that they should go to bed and sleep the whole night, 8 or 9 hours, is just not realistic.
Yeah. Talk to me about, yeah, definitely. And I think what you just said stood out to me is to be responsive. So I think, one of the things that I'd love for you to go into is like, what does the brain development, what does a child need in brain development when it comes to like our responsiveness to our child, our presence with our child? What are we seeing in the research there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's getting into like some of my interests. I don't know the research that well, but some of the more common sense things will come to mind is that we do need to build these attachments with our children, and they need to feel safe and that we are responding to their basic needs. And so I think that's what's happening a lot within the first 1 to 2 years, is that you and your child have to form this bond. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with both caregivers. What they're showing is that they really need at least one secure attachment. And so this is the secure attachment theory. And so that's really important. I think people stress that maybe that one parent is attached to the child or has more of an attachment than the other. And I think that's totally normal. I mean, more secure attachments, the better. But they will the research shows that with one attachment, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a primary caregiver. It could be a caregiver, but they need to feel that attachment, that they're being responded, their needs are being met and responded to, and they're not in an anxious anxiety kind of state.
Definitely. What about when it comes to, because I know we talked a little bit about this when we were getting to know each other, when it comes to nutrition and what the brain needs and what you're showing in regards to, cognitive development and neuroplasticity, what are some big needs of the brain when it comes to nutrition?
There are some big needs that we need to do more research.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that there isn't more research on nutrition. And as someone who's gone through 3 pregnancies and no one has talked to me about my nutrition, I think is mind-boggling. So I became interested in choline not too long ago. I started I'm working on a project in the lab where I look at an amino acid called D-serine. And D-serine is we found is really important for synapses to mature. It binds to a receptor called the NMDA receptor. Along with glutamate, it binds and it activates the receptor. And it's like one of the most important glutamatergic excitatory synapses in the brain. And it was only discovered in the brain less than 20 years ago, they started to discover D-serine in the brain. And it's like, wow, usually we don't have D amino acids in the brain. And so then they've done some more research. So I think they found it in postmortem tissue. And so from then to figure out what it's doing. Now they've discovered that it binds to a receptor. This receptor also binds glycine, so another amino acid. So I started looking into these amino acids. I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. Where are these amino acids coming from? How are they made? And so in the research we're doing is we're looking at neurons, but we're also looking at these neighboring cells called astrocytes or glia. And so these glial cells touch the vascular system. So it seems like they're getting a lot of nutrients from the blood, and the nutrients are coming to the astrocytes. The astrocytes are breaking it into whatever nutrients or whatever amino acids we need, and it's getting to the neurons or wherever we need it. And so, long story short, I guess how I became interested in choline is because acetylcholine is what is thought to drive, or there's a recent study that acetylcholine drives D-serine release. And so I was like, oh, well, where does acetylcholine come from? It comes from choline. And there's a ton of research that shows that choline is really important for brain development. And still, supplements don't have choline. No one talks about choline. It's very hard to get choline without having meat or some kind of animal protein. And why don't I know this? So I find it very frustrating that most people would have no idea that choline is extremely important for not only brain development, but brain health in general. It seems that there's decreased levels of choline associated with Alzheimer's as well. So I think that if we look at menopause, we probably show that they probably have shown that choline levels are depleted, and we probably should be increasing our choline at premenopause, or like lots of times. So I'm really interested and fascinated about nutrition, and I love nutrition. So we're trying to increase our at home anyways. I'm always trying to increase our micronutrients and our macronutrients, and find all kinds of different things to eat. And so we eat sometimes animal protein and sometimes plant protein, and we try and at least I do. No one else is as enthusiastic as I am, but I try. But they're coming on board. Everyone loves cooking, and so that's a big part of our day is cooking and eating.
Choline's really something that's come to light for me based on my pregnancy course and diving into the research there, and that so many prenatals don't even have choline in them. Mm-hmm. And then some have, we're seeing research as high as 900, and some, even the choline in most of our prenatals are below 400. So it's insane to me, the quantity difference in some prenatals, and then, where are we getting it? Animal protein, eggs, really that's, like you said, that's the strongest place where we can get those amino acids, and we can get things like choline that are breaking down to things like B-serine. Who would have thought that is binding to a receptor and allowing for brain?
Yeah. Acetylcholine is important for memory and focus. And I think in general, if we're low in choline, there will be cognitive side effects, and we might not notice it. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind with nutrition, is that we might be deficient in things that we don't even know, and we could be suffering, and constantly we don't see the consequences necessarily right away.
Definitely. That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, unfortunately. What are some of your favorite brain foods or nutrients that you're looking to get from your food for yourself and your children that support brain development, plasticity, and all of that?
Well, I've been focused on choline. So I started following Lily Nichols. Lily Nichols. She was on your podcast. I thought I'm not pregnant. And I'm listening. I'm finding it so fascinating. I want to take your pregnancy course. Yeah. I'm I'm not pregnant. I don't plan on getting pregnant. Anyways, but I think it's important. I think choline in general is important. So I could start with that. Yesterday we made this shepherd's pie. And so the bottom, we did it with meat, and then we did hidden liver. So I have recently started buying liver and adding it to a few little things. I've made chopped liver. Actually, we made quite a few videos for our YouTube channel. So we have a chopped liver recipe. And I mean, they're very casual YouTube videos. The production level is pretty low, but they're authentic. So it's fun. And we have a lot of fun. Yeah. I like to eat a lot of real foods. So I've kind of gone pretty extreme in taking out all preservatives from our foods. And I tried it, and it's hard. But I've gone through all of our cupboards. It was really great because last year we renovated our kitchen, so it was a good opportunity. And the other night, my kids were lying in bed, and this broke my heart. How come we never get those fun snacks with the gummy bears and so I'm trying to also try and make it fun, and trying to figure out activities so we can make gummy bears and figure out what's in them. And so a rule for me is I try to keep things at home as healthier as possible. But then when they're out, I really and grandparents come over, and I'm very flexible. The other night, not the other night, but a while ago, when we were still allowed to have visitors in our house, my father-in-law came over, and just before dinner gave them all a package of Smarties. It's oh, okay. But whatever. They ate the Smarties. They didn't eat much dinner. But I think for me, I have to keep everything in perspective. And it's so much more important that they're bonding with their grandfather and whatever. If they're eating Smarties instead of dinner. tonight's a write-off. Who cares?
Yeah, you're just balancing it with sneaking liver in their shepherd's pie. So it's totally fine.
Exactly.
I think it's about the effort. I really do think it's about the balance and the effort and controlling the controllable. And you're doing a great job at that. I know Lily has some gummies, like tart cherry gummies. And I know Katie Wells, the wellness mama, has some amazing gummy bears. So, gelatin and collagen rich, little treats for your kiddos. I'm sure you guys could make those, but I love that so much. I really do think that, I think it's so interesting to be where you are in your research and your career to like have these aha moments of like, how come no one knows this?
I'm a neuroscientist and I don't like.
But the fact that we're continually learning, we're learning is really, really important. What have you learned about like immunity and COVID and what we can be doing to support ourselves, and for me specifically through pregnancy?
So that's some of the research that we're specifically doing in the lab, is looking at how early immune activation can have long-term consequences on brain functioning and like how your brain wires up. And there's some really interesting studies that have shown that pregnant women who had children after having rubella or some kind of influenza where they were hospitalized, have children that have a higher risk for developing schizophrenia, and autism and a few other neurodevelopmental disorders, which is just in general interesting to think that something that's happening in your body when you're pregnant, you'll only see the consequences 20 years later. And so it's interesting. It's also very scary because I was learning about these studies when I was pregnant with my second, and I definitely had a little flu in the middle of my pregnancy, and I'm lying there and I'm picturing my child's brain and how it's wiring up. But anyways, it's a very low risk. It's just there is the possibility that it increases the risk. And so that with other maybe environmental insults, and it's cumulative, probably a genetic component, and they're all interacting so that in 20 years there's some outcome. Like schizophrenia is an extreme, but it just shows you that these early life experiences in utero, our environment, they are important, and they're shaping the way our brain is wiring up.
Yeah, long lasting.
It's long lasting. So I know when we go and get an ultrasound when we're pregnant, and we check out, there's all the organs and the heart's beating, and it's like we breathe a sigh of relief, but like there's still stuff going on that we have to keep. We have to think about. And I think nutrition during pregnancy, before and after pregnancy, is probably one of the most important in terms of initial development. And then regulating some kind of our stress levels when we're pregnant doesn't mean that we have to eliminate stress. And I think that's really important for us to remember in general, is stress doesn't need to be eliminated. It just needs to be managed. We have to manage our emotions, our everything, try to keep a positive outlook, I guess, on whatever stressful events, because it happens. It's always happening. You're always going to have things that are going on that are going to bring us some kind of stress or anxiety, and keeping a positive outlook that has been shown to be beneficial for the long term.
Wow. I love that. Just to think, like, you might not be able to control everything, but if you can write down some positive things that have happened throughout your day and start to focus on those, to find those in your day, can really be supportive of your child's brain development is awesome and amazing.
Right. Well, and it's even for like everyday parenting. If we can change our mindset a little, our children are going to fight, and that's okay. They're learning to communicate with each other, and they're going to be in a bad mood. That's okay. If we recognize their emotions, and we can teach them things through just being with them and supporting them. And we don't have to eliminate. I think that's really the important thing, is recognizing emotions and not eliminating stresses. And they can see that we're going through things too. And that's important. It's I think important for our children to see the authentic us. And they're going to, Yeah. So I wanted to tell you that the other day, one thing that's important for me is that I see I have some really close girlfriends and they've moved. They're about 2 hours away, but I still make an effort to see them. And it's been really hard recently, but one of them was having a birthday. So I decided I was going to drive and meet them for a walk in the woods and have a picnic outside. And so just as I was leaving, my daughter came up to me and she said, how can you leave us like this? And we've just spent like 6 months together all day, every day. They just started going back to school. So she's like, when we go to school, you stay home. And then when we come home, you leave us. And I'm like, wow, where's this is coming from? Like, yeah. And I realized, so I had to take a moment because like, wow, that's a lot. I don't want to feel guilty. I really need a day to go and visit and chat with my other friends. And so I took a moment and then I realized that it is a lot for her. I hadn't told her. I'd spoken to my husband. He knew I was going. I may have mentioned it. So it was a big moment for her. She's like, where is she leaving? Why is she leaving us? And then in the end, she wasn't happy, but I left and I was okay. I was like, I'll be back. And then when I came back, I told her about my trip and I told her how important it is for me to be seeing my friends and that I have a life outside my family. I go to work. And all these things are really important for her to see that this is real life. And when I came back, she was obviously extremely happy and she had a great day and everything was fine. So these moments where we think, it could be different reactions when that happens, that you have to kind of remember that they're young and they just need us to support and not react to them.
Definitely. And I think also the communication and coming back and explaining the importance, you're validating like that her feelings are real, but that you also have feelings and that when she feels, I'm sure when you're teaching her, when she becomes a mom, and if she becomes a mom and then has a job and then has her friends, that life is a juggle and it is about like that you are the most important thing to me because you're my family, but I haven't seen these people in months. And like, this is also important. That's right. It's full circle and full communication. I think is just such a great example that you're setting for your kids.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is your family is really important, but you're important and your outside life is important and they need to see everything. And we shouldn't be trying to make it look like we have any kind of anything figured out, that it's always evolving. We're all learning. My kids teach me things all the time. And I think that's great. So, that's kind of how I want to have our family, is that we're all interacting with each other and communicating and growing together.
I love it. Being present for our kids, getting them outside, making sure they're sleeping, looking at their micronutrients, trying to elevate the choline in their diet, and getting them involved so that they're willing to eat these beautiful, real foods, I think is so, so important. Well, geez, it has been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm so excited.
It's been really fun.
So excited for this episode to hit. Where can people follow along with you? I know you have a family YouTube channel, so we can learn how to make liver.
Or my husband is actually we did a pumpkin pie recipe from scratch, like pumpkin. We went to the market, bought the pumpkins. It took us like over 24 hours, but it was really fun. So our family YouTube channel is called Viva Family. And then I'm on Instagram with my name, Marion Van Horn.
Okay, great. Well, we will tag you in the show notes and we'll make sure that the YouTube channel is in the show notes as well if people want to follow along. I'm so excited about what you're doing, and it was really fun to get an insight into the changes that we're seeing, even down to synaptic pruning. So important. Keep your norepinephrine low, people. We want
just before bed.
Yeah.
We want it high in the day to focus.
Yeah. I love it. Well, with today's stress levels and artificial light and our ability to like not ever need to follow a circadian rhythm, it can be easy to kind of mess all that stuff up. So, just more reason for people to get excited about sleep. So thank you so much for your time. This was so fun. And
thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.